Today we'll be covering element E of the Small Employer Program Building webinar series. My name is Dale Johnson, filling in for Will today, who you've gotten used to. As usual, we have Lauren Davies, our combustible dust expert, covering these topics. And Lauren's ready to start his presentation.
Thanks, Dale. So as Dale said, we're going to be covering element E today, incident investigation. And this is one of the cornerstones of your safety program. So I'm hoping you guys are going to pick up a few things today. Our course objectives today are familiarization with the legal framework for incident investigations and reporting, understanding the responsibilities of an employer, supervisor, and worker, understanding the process of reporting injuries, investigation, causal analysis, corrective actions, and communication that is required, and identify and understand the OSSE audit requirements. We've broken this down into 3 topics today: the regulatory requirements, understanding the process of carrying out an investigation, and identifying and understanding the relevancy of the process to the OSSE audit requirements. Our introduction for today is, why is it required? Well, obviously the first reason is the regulatory requirements for reporting and investigating incidents, but we also need to identify and correct the gaps in the safety management system. We all need to understand that it's key in identifying the effectiveness of our hazard controls. Now we're about 5 modules into our program building, and you're starting to see how these components are starting to tie together. And again, this is one of the foundation blocks of your safety program. If we do this right, we'll minimize the risk of repeated worker injury or illness, and will reduce property damage and or loss of production. So let's get started with lesson 1, regulatory requirements. This is a little bit dry, but we'll try to get through it fairly quickly. Workplace incident reporting requirements of the Workers' Compensation Act, or WCA, is broken down to Part 1, Compensation to Workers and Dependents, Division 5. In order for this to happen correctly, there's 2 forms that employers need to fill out. One is the Workers' Notification of Injury, which is a Form 6A. Now, a lot of employers don't fill this form out because it's not submitted to WorkSafe BC. The problem is that when a worker complains of a reactivation of an old claim or an old injury, you don't always understand what was injured. For instance, if a worker comes to you with an injury to his right forearm and a year from now complains that it's his old injury acting up and wants to take a couple of days off work, when you check your file, you'll see that it was actually his left forearm that was injured a year ago. So it's very important that you have this form filled out in your records. Saying that, it is not a requirement to have it submitted to WorkSafe BC. The next form, the Form 7, is sent to WorkSafe BC, and it triggers a response that now it's waiting for an investigation from the employer on the incident. And 48 hours from the time of the injury, if a person goes to the hospital, WorkSafe will be looking for a report. WorkSafe Compensation Act, Part 3, Division 10, Section 172. Immediate notice of certain incidents. It's imperative that employers understand that certain incidents need to be reported immediately. And if you don't report these incidents immediately, WorkSafe can take a very dim view of this. So we want to make sure we understand the rules. So incidents that need to be immediately reported fall into this category: serious injury or death of a worker. And this includes major fractures, amputations, spinal or head injuries, loss of consciousness, severe hemorrhage, 3rd-degree burns, or potential sight or hearing loss. Now, those are injuries. Even if no one gets injured, things like major structural failures or collapse of a building, bridge or tower crane, hoist, temporary construction support system, or excavations also need to be reported immediately. If you have a major release of hazardous substances or gases, they need to be reported immediately. If you have a fire or explosion that had the potential for causing serious injury to a worker, you need to report that as well. And there's a few situations where under diving or blasting that they always require reporting. So I don't believe any of us are in the diving or blasting category today, but just be aware of that. So under WorkSafe Part 3, Occupational Health and Safety, Division 1, Incident Reporting and Incident Investigation, it outlines the following rules. Under the immediate notice of WorkSafe of certain incidents, incidents must be investigated. The process for how to do an incident investigation, the investigation report, and the follow-up action report. So if you're having any concerns about these, all you have to do is go to the Workers' Compensation Act Part 3, and you can review those requirements. Basically, most of the ones that we're concerned about is Section 175, Preliminary Investigation. The rules have changed in the last couple of years around investigations, so we're just going to go through this in a little more detail so that you can all understand. If you have an incident, an employer under Section 173 must undertake a preliminary investigation to identify any unsafe conditions, acts, or procedures that significantly contributed to the incident. And if you have unsafe conditions, acts, or procedures, determine the corrective action necessary to prevent the reoccurrence of similar incidents. You must make sure that it's prepared in accordance with the policies of the board, completed within 48 hours, and provided to the board on request. And as soon as practicable after the report is completed, provided to the joint committee, the worker health and safety representative, and if you're a small enough company where you don't have either one of those situations, it has to be posted at the workplace. So following the preliminary investigation, the employer must, without undue delay, complete the corrective actions determined to be necessary under subsection 1. Now, if the employer takes corrective action under subsection 3, the employer, as soon as practicable, must prepare a report of the action taken and provide the report to the committee, the safety representative, or post it, again, depending on the size of the company you're working with. So that was the preliminary report. Now, that is not the completed report. The remaining part of that report must be completed and sent to the board, okay? After you've determined the cause or causes of the incident, identify the unsafe conditions, and if unsafe conditions or acts were identified, determine the corrective actions necessary to prevent the recurrence of similar incidents. The employer must ensure that the report of the full investigation is prepared in accordance with the policies of the board, submitted to the board within 30 days of the occurrence, and have it posted for the Health and Safety Committee, the Health and Safety Representative, or on the board, again, depending on the size of your company. This is just a little bit confusing, so let's just clarify it. If you have a serious incident, you can do a preliminary report and complete your report within 30 days. However, for most companies, the majority of incidents that you have are not of that serious nature. So I would not recommend you doing a preliminary report. I would just recommend that you do a complete report and submit it. Normally we can do this within 48 hours and you will be finished. Now, remember in the 48 hours that this is business days. So if it happens on Friday, you will have 48 hours of business days. So that does not include the weekend, okay? Remember that if you have a serious incident or a complex one and you retain a consultant, for instance, to do an investigation or report back on a particular part of your process, you can have your timeline extended by submitting a request to your WorkSafe BC officer, and they will generally give you an extension if you're waiting for a report from a consultant. So, just a brief review of Lesson 1. Incident investigations are a legal requirement. So it's not something that's well, I don't know if I need to bother. Secondly, if you fail to follow those processes and procedures, you can lead to penalties and citations from your board officer. Remember that your doctor is charging WorkSafe for the medical visit because it happened at work, and it will key the database at WorkSafe BC saying that this is a workplace injury and you should have an investigation report submitted to WorkSafe within 48 hours. So there is multiple agencies asking for your report. If you have any questions on this, don't be afraid to take a look at the WorkSafe BC website, and there's your link for it. So let's start with a quick polling question. Does everyone understand which incidents need to be reported immediately? And I'll give you a second to respond. Okay, good. Let's move on. So this is where the rubber meets the road. Lesson 2, the investigation process. The identified steps of our investigation process are: step 1, secure the scene; step 2, collect the data; step 3, the causal analysis of the data; step 4 is determining a root cause; and then step 5 is the recommendations, corrective actions, and communications portion. So let's get started with this. Step 1 is secure the scene. We want to make sure that the scene is secured so that no further injury or loss takes place, depending on the type of injury that's occurred. Secondly, we want to make sure that the injured parties are promptly treated and transported to medical aid so that that is taken care of. Once that has been accomplished, we need to determine who needs to be notified and what is required to protect the scene until the investigation is complete. Understand, if you remove all the data, it's going to be very tough for you to have a good investigation. Secondly, if it's a very serious incident, damaging the scene contents will put you in violation of WorkSafe BC. So again, if you've had a very serious incident, you want to have approval before you move anything, with the exception of making something better for the first aid of the persons involved. Next, this is the situation why most people do not have a good investigation. It's the failure to collect proper data. Remember that you can collect statements from your witnesses. When you do this, you want to make sure that the witnesses are not sitting in the same room, because you don't want to get everyone to collaborate on a good story. You want to separate your witnesses so that you get the different stories. Next, you want to take pictures of your scene, the conditions present, and the damage that occurred, so that those are plainly visible. At this time, you also need to collect any physical data or measurements that you need. The length of the skid marks, the height of the object that it fell, the weight of the object that fell. This next step, a lot of people miss, and that's collect any process data or security film footage. With our computer aided processes that we have, PLC programming, we can pull the time log for that time of the incident and tell you exactly when the machines were stopped or when they were locked out. Don't fail to use this information if it's relevant to your investigation. Secondly, security film footage a lot of times will have filmed your entire incident. Don't forget to take a look to see if the area has been covered by your security footage or film. After those are properly collected, you can release the scene if you're authorized. But if you're not authorized, or it's been a very serious incident, you want to get approval from WorkSafe or the RCMP before you allow that portion of your process to go back to work. Next, step 3. This is the causal analysis. Once we've collected the data, we need to evaluate it. We need to ask questions about which systems worked and which systems failed. Normally, we try to use an incident theory model, and in this case, we're using Frank Bird's revised domino theory. It forces us to look at the system standards from the management control perspective, move on to the personal factors and job system factors that are the basic cause of the incident, and then move on to the immediate causes, which are substandard acts and practices and substandard conditions. This leads us to the event, and then the actual loss, the unintended harm or damage that's been occurred. So what is causal analysis? It's the way that we determine the cause or causes of the incident. Most incidents have multiple causes, and we need to identify all unsafe conditions, acts, or procedures that took place. Remember that we're fact-finding, not fault-finding, and this is one of the common occurrences with most investigations, especially with untrained people, is we're looking for someone to blame it on. Unfortunately, if we take that route, we are not going to actually get to the root cause of the issue, and the incidents will continue to repeat until we actually find the cause. The last part of this is implementing preventative measures. We need to make sure that we have a good cause in order for us to correct it. Again, just a little bit of a review. The employer must, without undue delay, undertake any corrective action required to prevent reoccurrence of similar incidents. And again, this is something that we need to do as part of the regulations, and this is something that we need to take care of. So an example of immediate causes: employee did not wear safety glasses, or an employee tried to unplug the throat of a dough mixer by hand, or employee took a shortcut through the plant off the pedestrian walkway. Here's a picture of a little situation that's ready to happen. If we froze this picture right now, we could call this a near miss. If we did that and we were investigating this near miss, what system should we check? In this case, it's the training, procedures, supervision, and possible previous incidents that have occurred at this location. Here's another one. This is what you shouldn't do with a forklift. If we froze this picture right now, we could call this a near miss. And again, if we were investigating the near miss, what would we look at? In this case, training, procedures, supervision, and even workplace inspections to see if this action is actually happening when we're doing our inspections. Once we've collected the data and we've put our immediate causes together and our substandard conditions, we can take a look at the root causes. And from here, we need to develop and implement controls and improve our systems to close those gaps. The key part of this is usually this comes up with permanent preventative measures to solve these issues. When we're looking at causal factors, it boils down to two questions: what equipment failed and what action led to the incident. So when you're coming to a root cause analysis portion of your investigation, one of the ways to find or to check to see if you found a root cause is ask the question, if I removed this root cause, would the incident go away? If that's not the case, you're dealing with immediate conditions, not root causes. So keep that in mind. Most of the time, root causes fall into the categories of incomplete systems, training, supervision, hazard assessments, or inspections. It's also possible that they can be reported and not fixed, or a result of previous investigations that were not complete, and as a result, you have repeat injuries. Once we've come up with the root causes, we need to come to the recommendations. We've collected the data into the report, and we ensure that there are recommendations for each root cause identified. So if we identified 3 root causes for this particular incident, we should have, as a minimum, 3 corrective actions. A lot of committees stop after 1 or 2 corrective actions. In most cases, there's probably 6 or 7 corrective actions that should be present during this investigation. We need to ensure that the report is posted and distributed and filed, and then put corrective actions onto a tracking log for follow-up. One of the other common problems is that we come up with a decent investigation and good corrective actions, but no one follows up to ensure that they've been completed. This corrective action log is an example of how it's simple to track, and again, this is just a simple spreadsheet from an Excel point of view. And if you'd like a copy, don't be afraid to send us a note. I believe we've already put it on the Learning Center as part of our Hazard ID course and our workplace training, or workplace inspection training. So again, it's just a simple Excel spreadsheet. With our corrective action plan, under certain incidents, we might have to have a corrective action plan submitted to WorkSafe, and that's the regulation for it. Remember that it has to be done as soon as practicable, okay? And it also has to be communicated to the Joint Committee or the Worker Health and Safety representative and posted at the workplace. One of the other issues that we have with a lot of the companies that we visit is the employer doesn't necessarily post their investigations on the bulletin board. Remember, this actually is a requirement under Part 3, Division 10. Oh, one other thing, under posting, remember when you post your incidents that there should be no employee names on the incident investigation report when you're posting it on your bulletin board at your work site under the Information Act, or Privacy of Information Act, sorry. Remember when you're doing your workplace inspections, workplace investigations, if you're having a tough time getting good investigations being done, don't forget that you have training that can be done under the Occupational Health and Safety for your Joint Committee as part of their requirement, and incident investigation training is one of the best ways to get some value out of your training dollar. So just a brief review of Lesson 2. Effective incident investigations are a critical portion of your safety program. If you track and trend your near miss and incident data, it'll provide you with information for continuous improvement in your safety and productivity. Remember, it's a key element of your safety program, and it can confirm or deny that the mitigations you've used for hazard controls are functioning as designed. So again, this is part of your plan, do, check, act cycle. Remember that near misses are free chances to improve your program and production process without the costs of injury or claims. And remember that investigations contribute to the plan, the do, and the check portions of the plan cycle. So again, if you have an incident, did you have a previous incident? Were the previous recommendations instituted or not? Were they effective? Sometimes they're not. Sometimes you have to do a few additional ones to change it. Next polling question. Does everyone understand the concepts of doing an incident investigation? Great, I'm doing good today. Okay, next, we're on to Lesson 3, OSSE requirements. The following items will demonstrate your compliance with the regulations and diligence in doing incident investigations. Excuse me. So 1, document review. Incident investigation specific procedures for all types of incidents, illness incidents. Investigation procedures prohibit disturbance of the incident scene unless necessary for the preservation of safety and life. This is just your incident investigation policy that helps your supervisors understand the requirements of your investigation process at your facility. It normally will specify a sound causal analysis process. It's also a requirement that employees are aware of their responsibility to report all occupational incidents, near misses, and illnesses. And this is normally done in our orientations. And corrective actions are implemented to prevent reoccurrence. And again, if you have a tracking log, this will actually demonstrate that it's done in a timely manner. Remember that managers and supervisors are held accountable for the incident investigation process, and part of that is having workers involved in the process. Under the requirements, training is required. So individuals who are designated to conduct incident investigations are trained, and once the report is completed, it's clearly communicated to the rest of the workforce. So this is a short review. If you complete the actions described in your incident investigation portion using trained managers and workers, you will meet the requirements for your OSSE audit. So again, this is a pretty simple element to meet your OSSE requirements. We just need to do the things that will give you a good investigation. So just a brief review. We've covered the regulatory requirements. We've talked about the process of carrying out an incident investigation. And we identified and understand what we need to get our OSSE points for this element. Again, I'd just like to reiterate how important it is to get a good investigation happening and how valuable it is to your company to have good investigations taking place. Once you have a committee properly trained to do investigations, the same process can be used to investigate other issues such as process downtime or equipment failures, and save your company a lot of time and effort and money as a result of that. So it's a very valuable tool to have in your toolbox. Any questions? We have Dale manning our computer today, so I'll get him to read out the questions that have come in.
Okay, yeah, good job, Lauren. We have a few questions that have rolled in that are related to incident investigation. So right off the top, can you guys have, or can we have the Manufacturing Safety Alliance of BC come in and do incident investigations for them?
Well, we have the capability here at the Manufacturing Safety Alliance to do this for you, but unfortunately it will have a cost incurred to it. So if you've had a serious incident and you'd like assistance, by all means give us a call and we can assist. But remember, there will be associated costs with this.
Okay. How soon after an incident do we need to complete an investigation?
Okay, this is probably the most commonly asked question that we actually get. And again, remember that you have the flexibility of sending out a preliminary investigation if you have a complex incident. But most companies are busy, and I wouldn't recommend this unless you have to. I would much rather get the investigation done within 48 hours and send out the complete investigation, and then you're completed. The other thing that will happen is some companies don't realize that the only incidents they need to submit to WorkSafe BC are ones where they have a medical treatment involved, where you're going to get the Form 7 being filled out.
Okay. We have a question here about documentation. Specifically, why do I have to submit 2 different investigation forms for a single simple incident like a cut finger?
I think I just covered that actually with my last question. You don't. For a simple situation where someone gets some stitches, you don't have to submit 2 forms. Basically, you can just complete the incident investigation at the first pass, set up your corrective actions, and submit that report within 48 hours, and you're finished. Do we have any other ones, Wayne?
Yeah, we actually have a question, another question from the audience. First question, there's 2. What is the difference between the small employer auditor training and the large employer audit training?
Okay, so one of the key reasons for this particular course being the small webinar process for small employers is that you don't require an outside or an external auditor to do your training. You all have received your notification that you can attend either virtually online or in person to the next internal auditor course, and as a result you can conduct your own audit and then submit the results to the Manufacturing Safety Alliance for quality assurance control to receive your certificate, your course certification. Once you're a larger employer, you cannot do that. You have to have an external auditor complete the audit and submit it to us for QA. So that's the main difference, I believe.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Next question has 2 parts. First part of the question is, how many forms do we have to record? How many forms do we have to record incidents?
Okay, so the one form that you're going to have is the WorkSafe template that you have. That part is broken down so you can that same form is used for both the preliminary and the final investigation. So that same form will work for both.
Okay. And we have a second part of the question is, do we have to have separate forms to record the incidents requiring first aid and different form for near misses or equipment failure?
Now, a lot of companies use a slightly simpler form for doing near misses and equipment failure because these ones will not have to necessarily be reported to WorkSafe BC. So the only ones that have to be reported as a near miss to WorkSafe BC are ones that are deemed to be very dangerous to the possibility of a possible fatality. So for the normal near miss, they will not be sent to WorkSafe. So you can use a simpler form that makes reporting by employees a little bit easier and more straightforward. Do we have any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you again for our next element, element F. You guys have a good day.